Aloha pu mehana kako, aloha kaua e mehana o kala, pe me oi.
Aloha, maikai no, pe oi.
Maikai, oi e mau no me ka hau oli.
And maikai, we have a special guest here with us today, but before we jump into a very robust discussion, all of us, we had like the pre-discussions into this was ono. So this is gonna, you're gonna love this, this Midday Manaʻo this week.
How's about our sponsors?
Right.
Here we go.
The Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement, thank you guys very much. I am the Senior Director of Community Programs at the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement. I'm lucky to be joined, of course, by my cousin and co-host, Mr. Manu Boyd, who works at the Kamehameha Schools.
Yeah, I'm here on lunch hour.
Yeah, and mahalo.
But no more food, money.
Okay, Nick, we'll put food on the list.
No,
right?
no, I'm only kidding. Aloha nui kako.
And we have another sponsor that we'd like to thank because it is their outlook on justice that really allowed us to do this podcast, and that is the Kaiser Permanente National Benefit Fund. So thank you, Kaiser, for that. And today we have a very special guest. Me and Manu both know her very well, but she was my kumu olelo Hawaii from back in the days. So she knows me when I was like really, really young. I didn't even know if I had kalahikiola yet. It was probably maybe pre-mama or right as I became a mama, so the early days of Mehana Kala. Too much secrets that we won't share today on the show.
And then you and I, we go traveling from island to island with our hui haku mele. And you bring your bass, I bring my ukulele, and always get plenty of food over there.
So to let you guys all know who she is, of course, this is Dr. Leilani Basham. Thank you, Leilani. Pe oi.
Oi mau no ka maikai, mahalo nui a olua, ke ia kono ana mai au.
Mau no ko mino aka ana mai. This Hawaiian is always smiling.
Well, I've seen her not smile when I was a student.
So, ole paha,
yeah. Well, might be the lei pikake make a pakalana.
Na hoa, oi ke kahi.
Na hoa ke kahi. Ai, well, nice to see you. Pea oi, pea na hana. He hana ke ia maula.
He kumua'o, he polopeka ma Liliuokalani, ma ke kula nui o Hawaii ma manoa. Ke a'o nei na papa, papa Mele ke kahi papa, a o ka papa hula ho'i.
We was just talking about, Leilani, or Professor Basham.
Leilani, well, make
change. We're going to call you
Professor Leilani.
Professor Leilani,
yeah. I like that.
Is teaching the class. We just talked about our dear kumu, Carlos Andrade, who recently passed, whose ho'olava is next month in November. But him and John, taught the very first class. And some of you out there are the first students who took that class, remember, had such an amazing experience, right, throughout that class. So awesome to see that class is carrying on with somebody who studied one of the major parts of Leilani's study in her master's and in your doctorate was Mele Lāhui. And I know for some period of time we also called, there's a subsection probably of that called Mele Ku'e, right?
Totally.
And so what is Mele Lāhui as compared to other types of mele?
Yeah, well, one of the things I was saying is that in a way, the term Lahui means people and nation, and it's this amazing word, right? Because it talks about the people, but also this kind of political entity of us as a people and as a governing nation. And so then, in a way, like all mele Hawaii are mele of the Lahui and Mele Lāhui, but we do see the term Mele Lāhui come out of a specific historical, political context, I think, because once we had different Lahui coming to Hawaii, right, Novaho mai, and we had shifts in our political, historical makeups, then we needed something to kind of distinguish us from others. And so these mele are particularly political in nature, political about, not just political about our rights to sovereignty and the Hawaiian kingdom and those kinds of ideas. I've seen the term first used in 1866 when Liliuokalani is requested to compose the first national anthem by Kamehameha Elima. And so she entitles it, I love her title because it's a very broad title, right? She entitled it, He Mele Lāhui Hawaii. Not Ke Mele, Ka Mele, or even just Mele Lāhui Hawaii, but He Mele. And that sort of leaves the door open, I think, for multiple Mele Lāhui to come through.
You know what's really interesting about that particular anthem it's really, it's written in the form of a pule. So it begins with Kamakua, Manaloa, Maliu Mai Mako. So she's praying to Keakua, and then espousing the beauty of Hawaii from Niihau to Hawaii. So, it's not necessarily always political per se, but it is, and this is a good example where it's really people-oriented, I think. And I'm sure, and it's kind of a difficult melody, so I'm not even going to attempt it.
Don't ask me.
You have to ask Nola Nahulu.
Yeah, I was going to say, you need a choral, but you could do that. You got to bring out your hui.
No, but
Many, yeah.
But the point is though that Mele Aloha, He Mele Lāhui Hawaii, a song of Hawaiian nationalism, a song for the Hawaiian nation, as requested by Kamehameha V, and then after that, from that point on, from the 1860s, then it goes full throttle. And I know you're going to tell us all about that.
There's a lot of activity that happens during that time, so I want to take just a small shout out to the organizers of Hawaiian History Month. Right, so Hawaiian History Month starts at the celebration of Liliu's birthday in early September and goes throughout the month of September, which we're in at the current time. And so I love that we can make some connection. Go check them out on their Facebook and Instagram sites, and they have a bunch of webinars that are going on.
Although I will
which
say that
right
really
in.
isn't every month Hawaiian History Month?
Sure, and every month is celebration of Aloha Hawaii too, right?
Exactly, not just February.
Right. But if we have these times where we're putting a particular spotlight, on
And that's
this,
important.
Yeah. So it's good that we highlight, the Queen's birthday in this, and so thank you for kind of making that connection. One of the questions that I had about the difference between Lahui, right? Because we use that term has become a part of the vernacular today, right? Again, more people are using it. What is the difference between Lahui and Aupuni?
Oh, you're getting hot now. I think this was a question on my comprehensive exams.
I told you I was there.
Yes. Well, I would say the difference is like the Au. I don't even know if I can answer that question really. I would say the Aupuni is more of, like, even if we just break those down, right? So they both have this time factor to them, right? Au could be a period of time, a current of time, and then the La in Lahui is about the day, right? And so they definitely have these temporal configurations, and they allow for shifting over time, which I think is really important, right? That it's not set in stone of what that is.
Right.
The difference, though, is that Aupuni, I think, is more like the governmental structure that would exist, and the Lahui is really the people and how we form our nation. Right. And I think we're lucky in a way from other peoples, other Lahui of the world, because we were so geographically isolated.
Right.
And I think even the Pai Aina references, like Mai Hawaii a Niihau, that is an Aina reference, and it is a people reference, right? And our connections to our ali'i but I think it's also about it is a political statement too, right? About the parameters. Our Aina parameters also determine our Lahui parameters.
Similarly, the word kulaiwi also means land and or people.
Right.
So kulaiwi Hawaii is a Hawaiian person as well. So I think that's the beauty of our language, the intricacies.
Right.
You can take it for its face value, which works also.
Right.
But I think we're going to find out more about these mele because they were inspired really out of, in some cases, out of angst.
For sure.
Out of frustration, out of disappointment. But I tell you, and I know we're going to get to Buke Mele Lāhui at some point, but you read some of those mele, the ones from Robert Wilcox, for instance, you would think we won the battle.
Oh, for sure.
Because it sounds like we did. So through our mele, we won. And I think we're still winning.
Right.
Yeah, well, I think that's the beauty of them is that they do have this historical record of what happened, and there are some parts in there where there's some challenges that we faced, but you're right, those are especially important, I think, because they're written by the people involved, so they get this first-person perspective that we don't see.
The data is there that kind of informs generation that comes after.
For sure, but they also use terms. There's a lot we typically in mele you won't include yourself, right? And we allow it to be accessible to all kinds of people. But in those particular mele coming out of 1895, there's a lot of ao. Ale ahiau ike I kanani, right? And they're including themselves, and I think that's because of their particular participation in those events.
Yeah.
I think part of it is to, especially in that, because it's this violence that they were enacting on their community and on their fellow citizens, right, to a certain extent, is they're really clear about the fact that the reason they're doing that is because of Aloha Aina. They're not doing it out of any other, it's out of aloha. And the fact that we have to become ho'apaio in this effort because we're on the other sides of this. But please, I think they wanted to be clear, I participated in this because I have aloha for our Aina and for our Kanaka.
Yeah, let's take a step back because we all know what the Buke Mele Lāhui is. We probably all have copies of it, of course, and you was instrumental in its republication and sharing of that information at the time when it was reprinted and brought back out. What are we talking about? What is the Buke Mele Lāhui?
Yeah, well, and to be clear, I actually wasn't involved in the republication of it, although I've since found out that it's actually from one of my Ohana members. So in a way it was, but I wasn't actually involved.
So funny because I attribute it to you all the time.
No, but it's not me. Yeah. I wasn't. So to be clear, like that's why I wanted on the record.
Okay.
On the record, I was not involved in that, and I didn't find out until later that it was actually the original copy that they used came from one of my family members, and so I didn't find out that for a while. So I wasn't involved in that, but I had already been working with the mele from that period. So it was wonderful to get the republication. So that was at the end of 1895, right? So the overthrow happened in 1893, and we see this huge explosion of compositions of these types of mele in opposition to the overthrow and asserting our rights to our national identity and our national independence. And so then 2 years pass, right? And there's been, frustrations. Hawaiians were relying on the United States to do right by us, right? Once they did their investigation. And they tried to give it back to us, but then the provisional government, right, refuses. So by 1895 is when the frustrations of Hawaiians reach an all-time high, late 1894, and they make a plan, and they have to, I'm amazed at how complicated it must have been in 1895 to smuggle weapons in, raise the money for it, go and find them in America, have them secretly shipped to Hawaii, hidden on island, organize the 200 people who were involved in it. So, it had to be a huge organizational event. And so then they make their plan, and unfortunately the Republic finds out about it, and so there's a false start in a way, and they aren't able to achieve their ends. And so it lasts for about a week and a half. So that was in 1895. The 200 of them are arrested, and that's when the Queen is arrested. Liliuokalani is arrested at that point in time. They are tried under a court-martial. And this is when the Queen abdicates so that they won't be executed. And so that's taken off of the, as an option for their punishment. And so then we see another explosion. So I have maybe 100 mele from 1895 that are all written, that I've collected.
And this
and
is happening all
published.
in the newspapers.
All in the Hawaiian language newspapers, right. And so there's probably many more than that, right? These are the ones that I've been able to go through and find them and know and feel confident to say that they are in this part of this context. So that's that's January of 1895. The trial ends in March of 1895. And during that period of time, the newspapers were also shut down, right? Because we were under martial law for about 2 months. Even though peace was restored, the Republic maintains martial law so that they can try those who are charged with treason.
That's like shutting down Twitter today.
Well, and then you're not.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. Twitter and Facebook. The only
Instagram.
thing that's left is whatever. An alternative perspective, right? So there were some newspapers. Kanupepa Ku'oko'a is a Hawaiian language newspaper that was still being published, but they were a pro-American, pro-annexation newspaper, and so they weren't seen as a threat, right? They weren't seen as printing seditious materials, and that's the reason that they were shut down.
Yeah, so many of these mele were actually published in Kamaka Ainana. And I think Testa was the editor.
Exactly.
And so, but I wanted to make a comment because I know this is your show.
No, it's fine to help me.
But I'm fascinated with Mele Hawaii in general, and it's just something that for many people in our audience who are not really ma'a with Nupepa Hawaii or the 200 or so Hawaiian language newspapers that existed over 100 years. They were filled with mele, not just Mele Lāhui or mele that had to do with conflict. In the case of the mele for Robert Wilcox and Queen Liliuokalani, but mele love songs and mele kanikau, or laments for when somebody passes away. But I tell you, and some of those sentiments are typical or are found in all different genre of Hawaiian mele. And another theme of many of our mele is Aloha Aina. And not just Aloha Aina in the political sense, but Aloha Aina in the connectedness to our land, the place names, the winds, the rains, and all of that.
Well, would you make a distinction between that though? Is it nice? Is it easily carved up into, okay, this is political, this is Aina, Aloha Aina?
No, I think everything is and they're all interconnected,
Right.
right? And so we definitely see these themes, like Aina is for sure there. There's even in Kaulananapua, from Kaulananapua to Kuha'aheo, right? We see this calling out to the different mokupuni and the ali'i from those mokupuni.
Yeah.
And I think that does historical, right? That makes historical because these are ali'i, these are former leaders of our peoples, right? It does Aina things because it's the islands themselves, and it's a people thing because it's the descendants of those ali'i and the people who occupy those islands. So it is working on multiple levels all at one time, I would say.
Yeah, so you can't really pigeonhole a mele Hawaii into a certain category.
Right.
Sometimes you can. Sometimes it's very obvious. But in particular, Robert Wilcox, is an interesting thing, and I'm going to throw this back to you regarding Le'ahi, Kaimanahila, Daimanahila, and as we know, many people know today around the world, is Diamond Head. We think of it as a very romantic backdrop for Waikiki, but it is central in the revolution of 1895. So maybe a little bit about Le'ahi and when you see that place name in many of these mele.
Yeah, and that's the starting point for the Kauakuloko, that counter-revolution of 1895, that gets referred to as the Wilcox Rebellion, but he came onto the scene quite late. But one of their locations that they were storing their arms at was at the Bertelsmann residence, which was right there, kind of where...
Kapi'olani Park.
Yeah, right on the other side of Kapi'olani Park, where the Kaimana, I don't know, is that the name of that? The Kaimana Hotel is, and so right over there, and I've actually... been able to interview some of the great-granddaughters of Bertelsmann who have been in that house, and so that's where everybody was gathering. One of the places, there were two places, one on that side of Le'ahi, and then the other at Ka'alawai, which is on the other side of
Black
Le'ahi.
Point, they say today.
Yes, exactly. And so those two locations, the police showed up with a warrant because they had heard that something was going on. So these are the Republic forces. They have a warrant to search the Bertelsmann property. And he kind of tries to stall them, and everybody's moving around, and then gunshots are exchanged. One of the police officers is shot and later dies, and the Po'e Aloha Aina have to run up into the hills of Le'ahi. Right. So those guys run up. The guys on the other side hear that the skirmish is going on, so everybody's kind of thrown off right from their plan. So their original plan was that hui from the Bertelsmann house would go down the beach road, they call it, but now we know it as Ala Moana and Kalakaua, but before they were named that. And the other group was supposed to go up Waialae, and they were supposed to meet at the Iolani Palace in the capital and take care of business. But they were unsuccessful because they sort of get blown into the bushes.
So they
climb up into, and they move up all the way Mauka, up and over, and so they just keep moving along, and they're actually able to hold their own. The thing that messes them up is the Republic forces keep bringing their Gatling guns. They have this Gatling gun, rapid fire, one of the early rapid fire, and that just blows them out. So every time they have to move, so they're able to hold their position. They're frequently on a higher ground, so they say militarily that's part of it. But they're able to hold their positions at every time until this Gatling gun, it takes a while for it to get there. Once it's there, then they can't do anything. They have to move again. So they keep moving. They keep, people keep getting arrested at each of these stops that they make, Palolo, Manoa. And then eventually
Even I think
Wilcox.
Mo'iliili also had some
Oh,
action.
for sure, yes.
Yeah.
They have those guys scrabble up there through Kapahulu and Mo'iliili. There's all these stories about the lanatana oi, and the prickling at them as they move through because it's just so, lantana, the cuckoo of it. So that gets brought into the mele. You definitely get these kind of, like I said, first person perspectives on
Right.
what they're experiencing as they cross the Aina. And then, so then they're court-martialed. Many of them are found guilty. Eventually, the Republic releases them, but they're not pardoned. So basically, and this is new stuff that I'm looking at, basically they're on parole, essentially, for the rest of their lives. If they do anything, they'll
So
go back
Kuhio
to
was
their
in that
original.
situation. Kalani Anaole was in that situation.
He was.
right?
He was.
Um,
Just another thing too that as I teach and share elements of history as well, people don't really realize that Queen Liliuokalani and the overthrow in 1893, she lived for 24 years after that in relative humiliation. If you think about it, and some will say, well, she just kind of started to kind of hang out with the with the other side and all of that, and it's so easy to sort of make judgments like that when we weren't there. We didn't have all the social, all those the underpinnings that she experienced. But I want to, if we can get to a mele specifically, I mean, you must know a lot, and I know that you're from the Halau Mohala Ilima Ohana, also Kumuhula, Uniki, and so her Kumuhula Mapuana de Silva, her husband Kihei, also is just a very 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 knowledgeable in these Mele Lāhui, and in many of your folks' concerts, your ho'ike, ahamele, these mele are performed. But do you have any specific or favorite lines or favorite mele that you can conjure up in your mind?
I do. So the one that I was referring to, it's called, it has different titles, but one of them, my favorite title of this mele, because it's one of the lines, is Ke Aloha Aina, Pa'a Mauloa. And that mele is 5 verses, and it's, like I said, it has a lot of first-person perspective. So the very first line is Alai Ahiau Ike I Kanani. Second line is Ke Kaua Ku Loko Akala Hui. And I love that because, like, they're seeing this beautiful thing, but again, that's why what I said about it's this violent, right? It's this violent clashing, but they're calling it a thing of beauty because it's about them, and the purpose again is for Aloha Aina. So then the next line makes reference to that. He aloha ku pa'a ka aina. And throughout the mele, every verse has some reference to aloha. Ke aloha aina e luana nei. Ke aloha aina e ho'olulu nei. So these different references to aloha aina that's, like luana is a hard word, right? When you first, like, it means to relax, but I think it's this aloha aina that is spreading out and providing comfort and contentment to the community, right? Even so, I think there's this constant assurance of themselves too, perhaps, and those around them, that we're not doing this because we're interested in the violent part of it. We're only doing this because of our love for our kingdom, for our queen, for our people, and our desire to have that reinstated.
It's a genius play on words and concepts and visuals, right? Like
Absolutely.
When people, and you interplay all of that into this very not ku'e, but like a very resistant, mode of what's actually going on, right? There's something that's going on. The Republic is happening at this time, right? They're seeing the effects of that, and yet they're able to kind of deal with it. Right,
but you know what the editor Testa does, though, is he includes many mele at the end of the book that are not political at all. They're love songs. They call them mele ho'onanea, songs to just relax and enjoy. But what I like about the Buke Mele Lāhui, if I understand it correctly, is that it was just a little book, and it cost 25 cents. And it was made small on purpose so it could fit right into your pocket. So every Hawaiian would have that book and be reminded of the poetic genius of our Lahui and the high level of poetry and expression.
Right.
And so many of them. Hawaiians. It's amazing. You can think you're being complimented from head to toe, but you're being cut down by the knees, and you don't even know it. That's genius.
Yes, that's one of our skill sets. Speaking of that, who are some of your favorite composers of this time?
I would say all of those, the Poʻe Aloha Aina of that Kauaku Loko era, because they do give us just this, like I said, first-person perspective on the mele.
But many pseudonyms.
Yes, there's quite a few of those. Even Liliuokalani, right, composes some mele during that period of time, and they're published in the newspaper under a pseudonym. Amy Stillman has brought that forward for us, and so she published under the pseudonym of Ha'imoipo. And so we know that there's one that she's composing, right? And we don't know this at the time they were aware of it, but there's this conversation that goes on between herself and some of the Poʻe Aloha Aina, and they're using the same initial lines, right?
Yeah.
So hers is Ya'ue na neana ma iolani hale, while she's relaxing, whiling away the time at Iolani Hale, but the palace, but she's actually talking about when she was imprisoned.
Yeah.
Right.
And she's writing, and then one of the Poʻe Aloha Aina write back and say, Ya'ue Mehana, and I forget the exact line right now, but right, they're in this conversation. So the mele also work as a conversation between.
They were answering each other.
Exactly, and she's imprisoned, right? She's locked up in the palace, but we know now that flowers were brought to her, and the newspapers, that was a way that she got to the newspapers, but she obviously also had a way to get information out.
Right.
So this mele was somehow taken to the newspaper and published. And then she includes them. So she's in prison for a year or so, 9 months, I think, then released to Washington Place and house arrest. Once she's released from that, she travels to Washington, D.C. really quickly. And while there, 1896, 1897, she puts together a book manuscript of mele. And she includes that book, that mele is inside of there. And so that's how Amy Stillman was able to connect it. And it's never been published, to my knowledge, that transcript. It's just a small, and now we have the Queen's Songbook, so that's been taken on by
Hui
the
Hanai.
Hui Hanai. But at the time, we do have this unpublished manuscript from her. And you have her handwriting on it and different, like, it's really small. It's not as much information as we'd like to see, but you can see that she's gone through and edited some things. It's typewritten.
Let's talk about something that we talked around, the circumstances of it, but it's one of the mele that has survived through that times in popular culture too, right? Because a lot of the mele, they're still there, and some of them have been pulled. You know, my favorite is Pu'uwaikila o Liliu, right? That we had you come to Halau and talk about there. And that we see it in remnants of other people's mele today, right? Talking about the mauna, talking about different things. But is one of those mele kaulana nā pua?
For sure,
right?
for sure.
So tell us a little bit about that from your examination of all of this. Right? What is the manui of, or something else added that we may not know about kaulana nā pua?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I found fascinating, that I still find fascinating, is because it is popular today. But what's awesome to know is that our kupuna found it just as engaging, and it was just as popular back then, right? So I think we know, and you guys have had conversations before about the context of that, right? This that employees of the kingdom were required to sign an oath of allegiance to the new government just after their overthrow. Within 2 weeks of the overthrow happening, employees were expected to sign that or lose their employment. So the band members refuse to sign, lose their jobs, and they run into Ellen Prendergast, and she pens the mele. And then the band reforms itself, and this is another place where the energy and the organization, so they had to raise money to buy new instruments, and they're able to order these new instruments, and they come in within 2 months. So they raise the money, order the instruments, get them shipped here, and they create their own band then, right? And so even just that process is amazing. And so then they start to play the song in concerts around Honolulu. And then these concerts becomes venues that at which the Hui Aloha Aina come and meet. So I found some newspaper announcements announcing, there's a concert tonight at the Hotele Hawaii Hawaiian Hotel, which is the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. And so then they say things like, ma hope o ka aha mele e hui ai na kanaka o ke aloha aina. And so these will be meetings set up. It's it's not a formal meeting announcement, right?
Right.
But keep in mind, right, that they have to be careful about their actions. And so they start having these, they just start having these concerts, which I believe are, these centers for meetings.
I learned this along the way. I think it was Aaron Mahi told me a story one time as a former Royal Hawaiian Band director. But that's not the melody we know of today. The original form of it was in a minor mode. So that means it was more chant-like, and it was first performed actually at Uluhai Malama when they planted the garden there. And then for a long time, because it was really made popular in the mid 20th century by the Kahawanu Lake Trio, and the melody was credited to Maddie Lamb. But when we go back and look, and this is something that Amy Stillman, she discovered in the Library of Congress and found the original sheet music and it was written, the melody, by Professor Liborno. Who's from the Philippines.
And he's the new bandmaster, right? Of the
Right. And he takes them on the road to go, and they were on the road in America to raise money to restore the kingdom, which is amazing. But he makes that melody, as we know, to Kaula na na pua o Hawaii, because the original melody would not be received well by the concert goers in America. So I don't think that melody was even ever performed in Hawaii for many, many years after their return. And then he moves on, he goes to Mexico and what have you. But it's a fascinating story.
You know, I was thinking, I was starting to giggle to myself because you was talking about how amazing, 2 months later, they raised all this money 2 months later, and I was like, you know what, they didn't have state procurement back then.
No.
Just a little inside state employee joke here, but yeah.
Another thing you should know, you get three kumuhulas together on one panel, and everybody like chime in. So, but we're all really good friends, and this is so very interesting. So Kalananapua has many different titles as well, but still alive and well today.
Yeah, and sorry, I'll just do a quick tag in. It was published like multiple times in the newspapers, right? More than any other mele that I've ever found. So I think there's a total of 12 publications between the first one, which is March 10th or something?
February 3rd,
1893. Well, she doesn't compose it until February 10th, so she dates it herself. We do see that in almost every publication in the newspaper.
But that was He noa no na keiki o ka bana Lahui.
Pololei, kapa ia mana inoa like ole. He ohu no na keiki o ka bana Lahui. He lei, he noa no na keiki o ka bana Lahui.
There's a couple ohu names too.
Yeah, so it's got several different names.
And the lyrics change a little bit here and there.
The lyrics do change, and actually we're just doing this in class with my students right now, and so pulling out the different versions.
Right.
And some of it we don't know if there's typos. Like sometimes, and there's a couple of typos, lines are switched. And then, so we're not sure whether that's the composer who shifted it or a printer issue. We do see some content, like the difference between, Kalananapua a Hawaii, a o Hawaii, a o Hawaii.
Right.
Those kind of small shifts, but then we do see shifts like Ualava becoming Uapau. Or no, kalamai, Ualava becoming Uaola.
Yeah.
Right, Ualava mako i ka pohaku. The first couple of times she does it, it's Uaola mako i ka pohaku, and then that shifts to Ualava in the Buke Mele Lāhui in 1895. It's the first time I've seen it as lava.
A good thing too, because we've gotten so ma'atu Hawaiian newspaper research, is that the oldest version is not always the best version.
Well, so that's exactly what I did. I pulled the oldest one. I was like, why am I not using the oldest one? So I just put it in there for my students, and then we went, and it's missing 2 lines. It's missing the 2 of the a'ole lines. So the a'ole mako a mina, I think.
Yeah.
And then in other versions, so then in late May, it gets published almost like 7 days in a row by Liliuokalani. And at the bottom of each of those is a little paragraph in Hawaiian that says, Mamulio kanuio nanoi yamako eino mako ke ho'opuka nei ho nei ike ia mele. Okay, ia ana ka mea polo leiloa maika lere. We just read this yesterday, so that's why I can do this. Maika lere nana i haku. Yes. Except they're missing all of the Aina lines. The pane mai, the 4 for like 4 days. They're not in there.
Yeah.
And then on the 17th, May 17th, then it's back in there.
Right.
And
See,
so
even back then, column space was very expensive.
Right.
Or just, well, if you just understand the way newspapers work, right? It was not as simple as us changing, right?
Not like today.
And so, and I think by 1895, it was easier than in the early days, right? They probably have some kind of a typescript machine going on, but still, they're still upside down and backwards. So, like, it's still a complicated process.
Right. It's still not easy.
It's still not easy. And it's still, you're still dealing with individual tiles for each letter.
Right.
And figuring
That's
out how
why
to lay those
people
out.
who use newspaper research, newspaper research, actually, those kumu are a lot less tolerant of any of the kind of mistakes that show up on computer written Word document where you have all these tools that do everything for you and they still come out hema.
Yeah.
Right?
I try to be. I'm not. Whatever. My own details these days are not as good as they used to be.
Can we get right into this? I want
Sure.
to just do the second verse, which is my favorite, and I'm a very strong
The one that
supporter.
was left out for a little bit.
Right. But I'm a very strong supporter of Paupu Mekeone instead of Pa'apu.
Well, you know, that was the other one.
Because it's a list.
And we never see Pa'apu. It's always Paupu.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a shift that we might have made in the contemporary because being unsure about the word pau.
Or maybe that there was a negative connotation for pau, but that's not
That's
that
not
kind of pau.
Yeah, I think that's a shift.
It's like
She
Hawaii,
never-
Oahu, Maui, and Kauai all
Completely.
together with. You know?
Right,
So
right.
here's that verse, and then we'll talk maybe a little bit more about calling out to the ali'i, the ancient ali'i. So, Pane mai Hawaii moku o ke ave, moku ana honoa o ke ihari, ka ko'o mai Hawaii o mano, haupu rekeoni o ka I don't usually sing before noon, so it's a little froggy. But that's just the
beautiful.
melody that we all
Nahe,
kind of
nahe.
know. You
Yeah.
know?
For sure.
Yeah,
So
and if
calling
we
out to
don't,
the
we
Ali.
should.
Right.
If we don't, we should. I know that I didn't know it. I've heard it my whole life, but I didn't sing it until I was in college. You know, and so sad. You know, and I was like, oh my god, okay, the next generation in my family will know this as children, right? Like really purposefully know it. So.
But it has such a good and very specific message.
Yeah.
And the aipo haku, that maybe we can talk about that. Aipo haku as a concept.
Right.
And that was something that actually that Henry Berger was the one who said when the boys in the band came and said, we're not going to sign this paper. And he tells them, what are you folks going to do? Eat rocks?
Right.
You know, how are you going to feed your family? And but that's not the same context that we love and perpetuate it today.
Right.
That is a ku'e stance.
That might get us into, into a discussion now where we talk about the modern uses of Mele Lāhui and so forth, right? So going off of that aipo haku, right? What jumped into my mind was in 2005 at a court hearing about iwi kupuna, right? Aipo haku gets shouted out because a judge is sitting there berating cultural practitioners whose life has been committed to protecting iwi kupuna, right? And he shouts out aipo haku and he immediately gets arrested, right? And so it's just like, oh my God, historical trauma much, it comes right back into that. We're in a court where a judge is going line after line, just berating these people, and aipo haku is brought out to remind all the Kanaka in the room that we would rather, right, what you are telling us is not wisdom, right?
We have a higher moral code than that.
Right.
Than your so-called legal.
Let me throw this to you because you are really the lawyer, or really the expert in this. But so interpret for our friends out there. Aole mako wa emina mina I ka pu'u dala o ke aupuni, a ke aupuni. Ua lava mako I ka pohaku, ka ai ka maha o ka aina. So maybe explain that. What are we saying?
Yeah, I love it again because it's like what these Mele Lāhui do, and we talked about the idea of Mele Ku'e. They do resist and push back against ideas of American colonialism and this push for us to assimilate to these different kinds of ideas and ways of being. But they also kupa'a these Mele, right, by asserting that what we have is sufficient, that we know how to do this. We've been doing this. We've always known how to malama ourselves and each other and our aina. And so I love that in that verse we get both of those things, right?
Right.
Push back against ideas of money, right? And them quoting that Berger, telling them, what you gonna do, eat rocks? And they're like, yeah, we would rather right? That we can't be tied into this money system that you guys are talking about. We have to remember that we are connected to our Aina and to the pohaku of this place that do feed us, right? That's our real goal.
Right.
And I think that's so important for us today on the Mauna, right? With the
Right.
university, who I work for. The University of Hawaii, though, is willing to arrest Kanaka and to make decisions for that pu'ukala, ake aupuni, of their aupuni, of another aupuni. And we're going to say, no, we'll lava, in that we are overly done with all that you have
Right.
enacted upon our Aina and upon us as a people, but also we are lava within ourselves and
Yeah.
within our resources, right? We know
Right.
we can feed each other,
Yeah.
right? Right now we can't feed and house each other, and we're at
fine
this
without the
critical
money.
part.
Yeah.
But we
were just
don't
talking
need
about that
that.
earlier today, about the value of food. I mean, really, of
Right.
just eating good stuff.
No.
But I want to say that, and because there are different variations of the last verse, but the first line of the last verse really says it all. Mahope mako o Liliuʻokalani. We stand behind Queen Liliuokalani.
Yep.
And that was really rather bold.
Right.
But it wasn't bold. It was oiaiʻo. It was kupono.
Yeah,
So this song is really, it has so much magic to it, you know?
We have seen a shift, so that first line, right, is Mahope mako o Liliuʻokalani, and originally it said A kau hou ia I ke kalaunu.
Yeah.
That's the original, until she
Yeah.
is replaced again on the
Restored,
throne,
yeah,
restored
yeah.
again on the throne. And that's one of the lines that shifted in a more
Right.
modern context.
Right.
I'm not sure what the timing is. Even my students were asking me, how and when did all this change, and when did we get to these? I was like, oh, such a good question. I haven't traced that entire genealogy to really listen to different recordings and maybe see their liner notes over time to see if we can really trace this, or is it that different families saying it slightly different, right? We don't see
Right.
huge content shifts, but we do see small shifts. So that now we sing Aloha e kapono o ka
Yeah.
Aina until we are in possession
You know what?
again.
This is something also about Mele in general for our friends in the audience, is that, when a song was written in traditional times, whoever it's written for becomes the owner of the song, not the songwriter themselves. This song was written for the Lahui, and many, many songs in different families, not just Mele Lāhui, but Mele Aloha. They have evolved and they have taken on their own. This is before we had, you can do cross searches and Google and all of that. But it's a Hawaiian characteristic, I think, of Mele, that it sort of belongs, and this one in particular, belongs to the people. So there may be variations that maybe that even the composer really kind of liked. But the interesting thing about Libornio's melody, because he tried to make it more palatable for people outside of Hawaii, it really has a pleasant lilt to it. It's a very pleasant melody. And so what that did though is it preserved without, and people, and I'm sure even the enemies were requesting it over and over at the
For
parties
sure.
because it was such a beautiful song, but they don't really understand what it's saying, and that is, and I would say that Libornio was here long enough to know that Hawaiian way. And I also want to make a comment to you mentioned earlier about the band reforming. They got all these brass instruments from Turkey, and Turkey was a place where these in Europe, Eurasia, up over there, and so the Royal Hawaiian Band, which is the impetus of this mele, was one of the most, if not the most, celebrated bands in the world, and even Sousa had audiences with Libornio and all of that. And the point is we have to remember as not just Hawaiians, but as a community in Hawaii in general, is that there are so many firsts and so many great accomplishments in the face of very difficult times. Beautiful mele, beautiful high skill music and poetic composition, and that is what keeps the ume i ka pu'uwai. It just keeps tugging at the heart generations later.
Right. Mahalo, Manu, for that. We only have like 2 more minutes left in our
And we're not
show.
both of you can't say anymore.
No,
You have to talk.
So yeah, no. So we bring this forward, right, to today. We still have a practice of this, of haku mele, right, of creating mele. what do you think is the most important thing for us to kind of keep in mind today, as we go along? And we have great mele being haku today, kumuhinas, of course, kuha'ahel, and so forth. Yep. So what do you think are the important things that us as a Lahui should really know or try to practice or be watchful for?
I'm going to say, Aloha Aina no ia. Right? Aloha Aina, because I think it extends, it is political, but it's also historical. It's about, the Aina itself and environmental, but it's also about each other, right? Because we're connected genealogically through our Aina, if nothing else, then, through that phrase of Aloha Aina can teach us a lot about how we engage with our environment and how we engage with each other.
It's interesting, though, that because Hina also calls back to those same ancient ali'i.
Yep.
And now this is 135 years later, after Kalanapua, and still referring to Kauai o Mano and Hawaii o Keawe and so on.
Yeah, I mean, these mele do, like the themes that we look at in my class and that are my research base are ea, right? Political ideas and how those get woven into our mele. Mo'olelo, the historical aspects. Lahui, the identity that connects us together through music. Aina, right, which is also connecting us, but that environmental aspect. And then pono, like what's right and wrong and what are our cultural values that we express through our mele. And I love them because, they also have this emotional, like this goal for the future. E mau ke o ka aina I ka pono, right? And writing about it, even if things weren't as successful, even if we're in the state that we're in right now, but we could still have this goal, right? It's something that gives us aloha for a future as well as our past.
Right.
Right? It connects us to both of those things. It's not just about honoring what happened, but it's about how knowing that takes us forward.
Yeah, well
That's
said.
super important.
Well
That's
said.
right. That is
Takes
super
us
important to
forward.
know that we are not a people
Yeah.
of just reflecting
No.
history, right? Because that's what we usually get pegged as.
Exactly.
Going back to
yeah.
the grass shacks.
Exactly.
Right? It's like,
That's
yeah,
right.
reframe
That's
your
not
thought.
it. Right? That's not it.
Reframe your
We're
thought.
fine with electricity. Kalakaua did that before
Right.
anybody else,
Right.
right?
It
We're
was a
fine
good-
with technology. We just need it to work for us and to not abuse
Opopono, yeah.
and not use
Right.
it to abuse other people, right? Especially
Right.
those who have less power than you. We need to use our power to help each other, right?
It's
That's
been
really
said
important.
that aloha is something that is needed by the entire world, And you look at Malamahonua when Hoku Le'a sailed around the world and going to different places and really connecting with indigenous people and learning and teaching. And it's interesting because a'o in Hawaiian means both to learn and to teach. But we have so much to offer the world. But we have to start at home with ourselves individually. And what you do at Kula Nui o Hawaii Mamanoa, and we all kind of do that in a way too,
Kaku.
is you gotta start
Different
with
spaces.
just teach somebody, teach your keiki,
Yep.
teach your
Exactly.
your homana.
Talk to anybody. Have a conversation with people about these kinds of ideas.
Do you have open? Is halal open right now?
It's not. I'm still. There's a
Okay.
lot of people asking. I'm
Okay.
still. I'm just trying to get back in person. Has been a shift. This is my
Right,
first
right.
time back in person, and so I'm just giving it a little time. But I'm hoping to go back in January. See,
So
look, now I've said it out loud. January.
Yeah.
I got to
you guys
figure out a
want
night.
more?
My days. I got to figure out the when because things have
We
shifted
went back in
time-wise.
August, but we're
Did
gonna
you?
take a break in October.
Oh, see, that's the kind of cool I can handle. So you did.
You did.
August in the era of COVID.
And what about you?
Yeah, starting up soon.
Are you gonna?
Starting up soon. Yeah.
Soon.
Yeah, I am. Yeah. I was gonna say December solstice. Yeah.
Well, let's
that
Well,
was
make
remember,
that.
we are
That's a
still-
beautiful.
I'm
We are,
See,
we are
that's a
still
great
in
thing.
this mai ahulau, so we're not
Pololei.
wearing masks right now, but malama pono, oko,
yeah.
okay, kahi,
Pololei.
ke kahi, and let's not get too tantaran about
Right.
like we're through this. So what we're talking about here is teaching, whether it's teaching your college class or teaching your halau hula. It's been a challenge,
Right,
and
right,
so
right.
me, I never take the challenge. I just went cancel halau for 2.5 years.
So did I. I just
Right.
pop.
Yeah,
I'll
but
just,
because
Right,
it's
right,
a time
right.
for ohana, so malama ika ohana.
Yes.
And there's times for breaks.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Right.
much. Mahalo nui ya oi.
Mahalo ya
So if you guys
ulua,
want to get
mahalo
more
nui.
of this kind of ike, right, I want to put a plug and a shout out there for Liliuokalani, right? The classes that are offered there, and one of the classes that Leilani teaches up there, Professor Basham.
Professor Leilani.
Yeah, Professor Leilani Basham.
Aloha.
And Kumuhula is Mele Aloha, which, really gets into the crux of all of this about Mele. And I'm so glad that you're there teaching that now. And she's also a kumu so look out, she said January. Yeah, go.
Well, and
go
I'm
seek
teaching
her
a hula
out.
class. I've just started an intro hula class this semester.
Is that Kamakaku?
At Kamakaku.
Oh,
yeah, so it's like a
awesome.
Gen Ed. So we're doing it because we already have a third year, and then you're teaching our third year Oli class, and so next semester I'm going to teach an intro Oli class. So we can start. And I'm not trying to bother you guys because I know you get other kuleana, but my hope is to sequence them out and then do some advanced classes on top so that we can do.
Yeah,
Yes,
send all of
yes,
your,
yes.
everybody
Send
send your kids to her because this is how you build identity and make everybody proud. And we're proud already. We're proud of our past.
Yeah.
You know, it's not perfect, but look at the world. The world ain't perfect either.
Oh yeah,
Right.
humans are
But
complicated.
yeah, complicated animals we are.
So mahalo for joining us on another episode of Midday Manaʻo. You can find us back here again next week, Friday, Avakil, right? Come and join myself, Mehana, and Manu, and our special guests at that time. So it's
But
from all of us here.
we're still taking a look at Midnight Manaʻo. But that's
Yes.
for another show.
That's gonna be fun though. Yes, we gotta keep it in everybody's minds. If you guys want to see a Midnight Manaʻo,
No, I'm only
comment,
kidding.
comment.
I'm only kidding. But
Comments,
mahalo
yeah,
yaoi.
comment mine.
It's a pleasure.
So mahalo again to the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement and also Kaiser Permanente National Benefit Fund for their kokua with this. And of course, our special guest today, Dr. and Kumuhula Leilani Basham, here. From all of us to all of you, ahui ho kako.
Ai, ke
Aloha.
aloha.